If you spend much time in this hobby, you're going to need to get some tools, and there is no tool to make your life more convenient than a power driver. But most of these power drivers, including this one stock, have a big problem. In this video, I'm going to tell you why this driver is the best one to get and how to modify it to make it the best tool in your arsenal. And then I'm going to modify a brand new one and give it away to one of you guys, so stay tuned, this should be pretty interesting. Every RC car that you own is going to break eventually, and of course all of these RC cars have dozens and sometimes hundreds of screws in them, which is why having a power driver is so important. But before we dig into this, let's talk about some of the tools I think everybody should have in their arsenal for working on their RC cars. The very first thing you're going to want to buy is a set of hex bits. These are MIP hex bits, and whereas they are very expensive, they're also the best bits you can buy. You're going to want a good set of hex bits because if you go cheap, you're going to end up stripping out screws, and that's not going to be a good time. Bits like these MIP hex bits are both very, very strong, and they're also precision machined so that they fit the screws very, very well. You can see this bit actually holds onto this screw because it fits so tightly in the hex. Cheap bits might fit well in the beginning, but they're not going to fit well in the long run because these tips are going to wear out. So spend the extra money, get good bits like these MIP ones. And especially if you're going to be using a power tool, I recommend getting the bits that fit into that, and then just getting a handle you can use for hand tightening. We'll talk more about the importance of hand tightening here in just a few minutes. The three sizes I recommend are 2mm, 2.5mm, and 3mm. These are going to allow you to fix the vast majority of vehicles out there, including most 1/10 scale and 1/8 scale vehicles. If you're working on smaller vehicles, I'd also recommend getting a 1.5mm bit. Whereas they aren't absolutely necessary, these ball tip bits are also really nice. They allow you to access screws from an angle, which can be really handy in certain circumstances and really save you some time not having to remove things that are partially blocking other screws. However, if you're going to use one of these, make sure you do it really carefully. If you install a screw, go ahead and screw it in to begin with by hand at first, and then use the bit, because if you try and install it with one of these bits from the beginning, you're probably going to put it in crooked. That being said, these ball tip bits are invaluable in certain circumstances. One of the next things you're going to need is some sort of wheel wrench. This is a cross wrench. It comes with a few different vehicles, or you can buy them online. Arrma also gives one of these with several of their vehicles. It has a 17mm wrench and a smaller wrench on it. This cross wrench will work on most different types of wheels, as well as a lot of different shocks. A supplement to this that I think is a great option is to get a small pair of these Knipex pliers. They're adjustable and they have parallel jaws, so they allow you to grip basically any size hex, and they're a really good general purpose tool. Again, not cheap, but you do get what you pay for. Something that a lot of people may not have even ever heard of are these shock pliers. They're made of aluminum and they allow you to grab shock shafts without damaging them. Also, very importantly, they have a ball end installation and removal tool. This makes installing and removing those pieces much easier than trying to do them with a pair of pliers, and makes you much less likely to damage them. And then finally, one of these small cross wrenches is really handy to have as well. These come in a bunch of different vehicles, or you can pick one up for a couple of bucks on Amazon. With just these tools you see right here, you can probably do 80% of the work you need to do on an RC car. There are some other things that are handy. One of these picks is great for getting gears out of differentials and removing seals. A pair of these nice flush cut pliers is great for cutting the ends off zip ties so they don't leave jagged edges that cut your hands. And just some general other screwdrivers are always handy to have. We're going to show you a few more things you might want to grab as you get more advanced in this hobby, but for now, let's focus on this driver. This is the NoCry Driver. It's a silly name, but it's a very good tool. It is adjustable speed, which I think is absolutely critical. Obviously, it's reversible. It has an adjustable clutch on it. That adjustable clutch allows a limited amount of torque to come to this output. It is rechargeable, and it has a little battery meter on it. The problem with it is that in its unmodified state, this is an unmodified driver. Even on the lowest setting, it's too powerful for these little screws. As you can see here, I just immediately stripped out that screw. If you take a look at my modified version, we put this on one, you can see that clutch has almost no resistance, and you can put basically any screw in you want. However, on its max, it can still do this. That screw was very tight. Let's see how this thing works. This clutch is fairly simple. Basically, all it is a spring that presses against a washer that pushes on some pins and balls that work on a ratchet. Be careful when taking this apart. These pins do like to fall out, but you don't even need to take this plate off in order to do this modification. What we need to do is put less tension on this spring, which we're gonna do by shortening it. As you can see from my already modified one, I've reduced the length of the spring pretty significantly, and it's fairly easy to do. You are going to need some sort of abrasive wheel, or you could even probably do this with a file, but it's going to take quite a bit of time. Now, before we cut down this spring, let me show you a few other tools I think are really cool in this hobby. The first one's going to be a good soldering iron. This Hakko FX888D is a great option. You'll also want to get some good lead-based solder to go along with that. A flashlight is always helpful. Genuine 3M VHB double-sided tape is a lifesaver when you can't figure out how to mount things with screws. And of course, you've got to have some thread locker. This Vibrotite blue gel is fantastic. It doesn't make much of a mess. It's really easy to dispense, and it holds really well. Now let me show you how to turn this spring into this spring, and then I'll tell you how you can win a brand new one of these already modified. There are a couple of very important things to keep in mind when shortening a spring. The first one is that no two of these drivers is going to be identical, so the amount by which I shortened the spring might not be the exact amount that you need to shorten your spring. And the second and possibly more important thing is that you need to make sure you don't make this spring too hot when you're shortening it. These springs are heat treated, and if you get it really, really hot, you can mess up the heat treat and cause the spring not to work properly anymore. As you can see here, I cut off a little bit less than one full coil, and that worked really well for my particular driver, causing me to have almost no resistance at the lowest setting, but full resistance at the highest setting. I'll give you a little tip about the resistance at the end of the video, as well as some precautions you need to take when using power drivers. Since all of these are going to be different, what I recommend you doing is taking a little bit off at a time, and then checking it in the driver until you get the feel that you want. Remember, you can always take more metal off, but you can't put it back on. Now we'll just slap this back together. And as you can see, even on the lowest setting, that tension's still pretty tight, so I need to take more off this spring. I'm gonna play around with this some more, slowly taking more off until I get the amount that I want. And then I'm actually gonna flatten off the spring a little bit so that it puts more even pressure on this ring. Make sure you take into account the fact that it's gonna get a little bit smaller when you flatten it off. I'm gonna do that with a sander. You could do that with regular sandpaper, or like I said, probably even a file. Then we'll come back and I'll tell you how to be the most successful with one of these drivers and tell you how to win one. I think this will just about do it. While I'm putting this together, let me give you some precautions when using these sorts of power tools. Even if you're very, very careful, you can still strip out screws with a tool like this, and that's because it's really easy to get the setting wrong if you're not paying attention. That's why I always recommend you start off by putting the screws in by hand, and you finish off by hand. That'll still save you a lot of time, but it'll prevent you from stripping out screws. Of course, I don't always follow my own rules, and sometimes I do pay for it, but it is a very good thing to do. Another thing to mention is that you aren't just limited to these settings on your driver. You can go between them to get the amount of torque that you want. This is essentially infinitely variable. Let's see how that works. And that feels just about perfect. I can easily hold that with my hand, yet it's basically completely locked at max. You can pick one of these drivers up on Amazon. When you're working on yours, make sure you pay attention to how it comes apart. It can be a little bit tricky to put back together, but you don't actually have to worry about that because I'm giving away this brand new, already modified driver. All you have to do to win is make sure you're subscribed, like this video, drop me a comment, and then check out one of these videos.